So far you've learned 3 different methods for solving quadratic equations. The first method we talked about was graphing. In order to use graphing, what you're looking for is where that parabola crosses your x-axis. So we can see here we have 2 solutions. One is where x equals -4, and the other is here where x equals -2. Now we also talked about how you could solve equations using factoring. So we find our standard form equation, we factor it, and then you take each factor and set it equal to 0. Once you have each factor equal to 0, you just solve the equations. So in this case, I'm going to subtract 4 on each side, and I could see that x could be -4, or if I solve this equation, x could also be -2. Now the last method we used was finding square roots. In order to use this method, we need a quantity that's being squared. And what we want to do is get that quantity being squared all by itself. So here I have x plus 3 squared, oops, my plus, and that equals 1. So once you have the squared quantity by itself, we're going to take the square root of both sides. Because taking the square root of this squared term is actually going to cancel that out, and we're going to be left with x plus 3 on the left here, and then the square root of 1 could either be +1 or -1, because every square root has 2 values, a positive and a negative. So to find our solutions, we're now going to find each of these answers. We'll take x plus 3 and figure out what it equals. When we have a +1, and we'll do x plus 3, it might also equal -1. So we're going to solve both of these equations, and in this case x could be -2 or x could be -4. So all 3 of these examples on the top show the same solutions. It's 3 different representations of the same quadratic equation. But what would you do if you had an equation that looked like this? Okay, it's not a graph, so we can't use graphing. We don't have vertex form, so we can't use square roots. So you might be thinking about factoring. But we've only ever factored when we've had whole numbers. Okay, it's hard to factor if you have a decimal value. So what we're going to do is I'm going to teach you a new method, and this method is called the quadratic formula. It works in every situation. Okay, you just need to have an equation that's in standard form. And we've talked about how you can change vertex form to standard form, so you should be able to use this for all the types of questions you should get. Now, before we get started, this is your quadratic formula. It looks really intimidating. It's got a lot of values in it, a lot of letters. The good news is you will not have to memorize this formula. Okay, anytime you use this formula, it'll be given to you. You probably will memorize it, but you don't have to. Okay? And the other thing about this formula is it's just a formula. Every single one of these letters here has a specific number that we're going to put in place. And then once everything's in there, it's just a math problem that needs to be solved. So some things you need to know. Number 1, you have to have an equation that's in standard form, because these letters A, B, C up here are corresponding to our coefficients and our constant in standard form. Okay? Now the A, the B, and the C that are up here in the formula are just talking about the numbers we have down here. You will never take these x's or this x squared and put it into this formula. The only thing that's going to go in are the numbers. And once you understand how the numbers go in and how to solve it, it's not so bad. It just takes a lot of practice. So here we go. We're going to start by solving this equation. Okay, x squared minus 2x minus 35 equals 0. The first thing I want you to do all the time is identify your values for A, B, and C. A is going to represent the number or the coefficient in front of your x term. In this case, it's a 1. Your B value is the number that's in front of x. So right here, a -2. This looks like it says minus 2x. When you group it, this is a -2. So our B value is going to be -2. And that's really important for you to list it like this. And then C, we'll come over, C is our constant. Again, -35. Okay, so once you have all these values, the next thing we need to do is write your formula. I always want you to write out your formula because it's really easier to put these numbers into specific places. You won't forget things. You won't leave any numbers out if all you're doing is replacing the letters with the numbers. Okay, so your formula looks like this. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Now I have this b and this b in parentheses for a reason. And the reason they're in parentheses is because of this square value and this negative sign. A negative is going to impact what's inside our parentheses, and if there's a negative value here, I want you to be aware that you've got a negative negative. So these parentheses kind of separate it for you. Over here, without your parentheses, if you used a calculator and you just did negative 2 squared, your calculator wouldn't calculate it correctly. So again, put the parentheses around. In fact, any time you have a negative value, you should put it in parentheses to help you kind of separate it and make your attention aware that it's negative. Okay, so now that we have our formula written, let's plug in. So we've got negative b. So my b value here is negative 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that negative 2 and plug it in for b. So remember, we've got negative negative 2 plus or minus the square root, this big symbol square root, of b squared. So you're going to take your b value again, put it in parentheses, and square it. So negative 2 squared. Then a minus and a 4, and then your a value, which is 1, times your c value, which is negative 35. And again, put that in parentheses. All of that is part of a fraction that's over 2a. So the last step we're going to do is divide by 2 times a. Okay? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to solve this problem. And we're going to do it using a calculator, but we're also going to do it step by step. I don't want you to try to put this entire thing into your calculator. There's something you're going to learn about in a couple days called a discriminant value. And what I'm doing now is going to help us with that discriminant when we get to it. So please, please, please multiply this out the way I'm telling you to. And what I want you to do first, is multiply. Hey, get rid of that. I want you to multiply everything that's under the square root symbol. But don't take the square root yet. Use your calculator, and what you're going to do is you're going to multiply negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 35. Okay, and when you do that, what you're going to get looks like this. Okay, I simplified negative negative 2 becomes a positive 2, plus or minus. We still have our square root symbol, but all this information that's down here, that becomes 144. And then 2 times 1 is 2. So we have 2 plus or minus the square root of 144 divided by 2. Okay, next step, we're going to now take this square root of 144. Okay, so you're going to do the square root of 144, and we're going to find that that's 12. So 2 plus or minus 12, because 144 could be positive 12 or it could be negative 12. That's what this plus or minus means, divided by 2. And now here we can't do any more simplifying until we figure out what we have on the top here. So we're going to do 2 separate equations. The first thing we're going to do is figure out what 2 plus 12 would be, and we're also going to figure out what 2 minus 12 would be. It's always important that you do both problems here. So 2 plus 12 is going to give me 14, and 14 divided by 2 gives me 7. So one of my answers here is 7. Over here, we're going to do 2 minus 12. 2 minus 12 is negative 10, and negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. So using our quadratic formula, we found our 2 solutions could be positive 7 or negative 5. Now, we've done problems like this before using factoring. And so I want to show you what this would look like if we factored it. Okay, when we factor, we start with our box method. So we're going to start by putting our first term in the top left box and our last term in our bottom right box. And we're going to multiply these 2 numbers together and see that we're looking for factors of negative 35 that add up to this middle term of negative 2. So factors of negative 35 are going to be negative 7 times 5. If we add them up, we get negative 2. So what I'm going to do now, I'm not going to spend too much time factoring. I'm just going to finish off my box. I put my factors here. I look for my GCF. And what I find is my factored form is x minus 7 times x plus 5 equals 0. This should have an equal 0 up here. Okay, so x minus 7, we're going to solve that. We get an answer of 7. X plus 5, we're going to solve that. We get negative 5. And we can see that our two solutions are either positive 7 or negative 5, which is exactly what we got using our quadratic formula. So sometimes if factoring looks straightforward to you and you see your factors, it's easy to do, you can use this method. But there might be times when you can't figure out how to factor it, or maybe you were never really comfortable with factoring, that you might want to use the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula will work all the time. Okay? So let's just do 2 more practice problems together. So in this case here, we've got x squared plus 4x minus 5. First thing we're going to do is we're going to list our a, b, and c values. So a is 1, b is going to be right here, positive 4, and c is going to be right here, negative 5. So now always write your formula, and we're going to plug it in. So negative b is going to be negative 4 plus or minus the square root of b squared. My b value is 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 5. And all of this is over 2 times a. So next step, we're going to do the math problem that's underneath our square root symbol right here. Leave your square root symbol, just do all the math. 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 5. And what we're going to get is negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 36. And then 2 times 1 is 2. So now we're going to do our square root. So this time we're going to do the square root of 36. And when we do the square root of 36, we get plus or minus 6. So negative 4 plus or minus 6 divided by 2. So we're going to solve 2 different problems. We're going to do negative 4 plus 6, and we're going to do negative 4 minus 6. So negative 4 plus 6 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Over here we've got negative 4 minus 6, which is negative 10, and negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. So our 2 solutions here are going to be 1 and negative 5. All right, we're going to try one more together. This one I want you to try to do as much on your own as possible. So start it off, pause the video, do a couple steps, watch the video, and then make sure you're on the right track and keep going. But see if you can do it by yourself. So your first term, a, is going to be 2. Your b term is going to be 7. And your c term is going to be down here, negative 9. Go ahead and write your formula. Don't forget to write your formula. And now we're going to plug in. So negative b is going to be negative 7 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 7 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 9, all over 2a, which is 2 times 2. Okay. Next step, do what's under your square root symbol. Multiply all this together, and when you write your answer, you're going to get negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 121 divided by 4, because 2 times 2 on the bottom there is 4. Next, you're going to take this square root, and the square root of 121 is 11, so you're going to get negative 7 plus or minus 11 divided by 4. Set up 2 problems. The plus 11, or your minus 11. So negative 7 plus 11, negative 7 minus 11. Negative 7 plus 11 is 4, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. Negative 7 minus 11 is negative 18. Negative 18 divided by 4 is 4.5. So this is one of those examples where we couldn't have factored this because we couldn't come up with a factor that's a decimal like this. So this problem we would have to use our quadratic formula for. And we're going to do a little more practice with this, and we're going to talk about a couple special situations. But right now, go ahead and try the on your own problems, and then check your answers when you're all done using the document that's posted.